Have you ever watched a reality TV moment and felt as if the air in the room had disappeared? That was the atmosphere when Season 13 debuted, and spectators recognized this wasn't just another argument. This sounded deeper and colder, like two people standing on the precipice of a life they had built together over years. Reports started to appear online. Everyone had the same question when footage went popular on social media. Did Mendeecees simply admit that the relationship he fought so hard to keep no longer makes sense to him? At first glance, the scene seemed peaceful. The silence was more potent than any combat we have ever seen, even though there were no loud shouts, glass breaking, or spectacular departures. Yandi's voice, which sounded tired but not defensive or furious, caused many to pause the video and rewatch the incident. As she said that she couldn't keep living this way, you could almost feel the timeline of their history flashing in the background. Years of mutual protection against rumors and blogs, marriage vows, prison calls, and public loyalty. Then came the line that sparked the internet: "The puzzle isn't finished yet." Within minutes of the episode airing, the discussion channels were on fire. Reaction videos flooded timelines, and speculation about the true significance of this started to grow. According to other observers, this is just another challenging stage in a long-term collaboration. According to others, this is the first tangible sign that the marriage might be about to dissolve forever. The larger narrative that viewers had been following for a while took precedence over the show itself. They have both made references to emotional detachment, the pressure of public criticism, and the question of whether loyalty lasts. New reports begin to surface just when you think you have a firm grip on the problem and faith begins to waver. Speculations regarding past relationships, unresolved tension, and conversations that may have happened off camera. It was all spoken about and unproven, but it was enough to keep the audience interested. Try to read between each word, pause, and look, because in reality TV, the quiet moments can make all the difference. Furthermore, this one appears to be the beginning of an unfinished story. Instead of seeing the conversation as a scene from a show, viewers thought it was a private moment that somehow found its way into television, without any dramatic musical cues. That initial encounter was marked by the kind of weighty silence that usually follows years of things being kept unsaid. Commentary channels began to emphasize how they were both choosing their words carefully, almost as if they were trying to avoid igniting another argument. And that restraint only served to underline the tension. Without shouting, the simple statement, "I'm tired of waking up tired," sends a significant message. Fans started filming the event and posting it online, commenting on the difficulties of sustaining a connection in the face of public scrutiny, emotional distance, and how loyalty can often turn into a burden rather than a source of support. People who had been following them from the beginning began to compare this period to earlier seasons, when they were shielding each other from outside noise. At the time, the narrative focused on unity and resisting discrimination and rumors. It feels like a different debate now. According to bloggers, the shift in tone is not the result of a single incident, but rather a deeper crack caused by a buildup of resentment. Yandi's expression of her wish for something different makes this clear. Instead of using an aggressive tone, use a reflective one. It sounds like someone who, after months of deliberation, has finally decided to ask the same question out loud. Complicating things is the way their private dynamic has been infused with public speculation. Mendeecees discusses the stories, the blogs, and how the cacophony is overpowering their own voices. And that claim sparked a whole new online discussion. Some viewers believe that outside pressure can cause even strong relationships to fail. Others argue that public life just highlights underlying issues. Either way, the effect is clear. When there are just two people involved, the partnership doesn't last. Some individuals watch it. The crowd is also observing every pause and facial expression, and comment pages are also picking up on the moment where he talks about pride and the difficulty of accepting an emotional connection. That conversation transformed the plot from a shallow drama to something more nuanced. Because emotional betrayal is harder to quantify than physical acts, fans continue to argue. Some people wonder if the emotional distance in a relationship might make someone search for anything else. Some see it as a clear boundary that was crossed, while others see it as a link. Since the show itself doesn't offer a definitive answer, the debate continues long after the episode ends. The addition of friends and cast members to the story added another level of complexity. Unlike when someone sits with a friend and confides in them about feeling lost, arguments cannot humanize the problem. As he acknowledged his own past mistakes and struggled with his emotions around what had occurred to him, viewers saw a man trying to find a balance between vulnerability and pride. This contrast makes the story more about two people who are emotionally estranged from one another than it is about villains. Yandi's point of view resonates with another audience section: her attention to the children, her desire to end the cycle of unresolved stress, and her focus on creating a healthy environment all demonstrate her practical approach. She's not talking about dramatic exits, she's talking about long-term health. The contrast between pragmatic decision-making and emotional suffering is what gives the plot its weight. There are multiple explosive moments at play. Years of history are involved, reaching a point where both parties are considering if it would be preferable to remain together. Social media responses have been conflicting. Some admirers are urging them to fight for their love because of everything they have already gone through together. Others say that growing occasionally requires letting go, especially when both sides seem exhausted. The phrase, "the puzzle doesn't fit anymore," has become a kind of acronym for relationships that have changed over time. The plot has changed from being merely entertaining to something more significant, as evidenced by the fact that other people are using it in their own works and applying it to their own experiences. Furthermore, there is a noticeable shift in how their interactions are interpreted. Moments that might have seemed ordinary in past seasons are now viewed through the lens of possible separation. Even a simple conversation about space can reveal emotional distance. Being calm develops into a sign of giving up. This is the process of narrative framing. Each piece of information starts to reinforce the viewer's sense that a relationship is in danger. The timing that is being debated online adds another layer. In an effort to determine when the shift began, viewers are going back and reviewing previous shows, interviews, and public appearances. Some speak of the period after major life changes, while others point to specific situations where communication seems to be challenging. Whether or not these interpretations are accurate, they contribute to the overall perception that this is not an instantaneous development, but rather the result of a lengthy process. Family dynamics are another area of focus for critics. The difficulty of explaining such a choice to children adds a level of seriousness that goes beyond typical reality television drama. It moves the emphasis from entertainment to the consequences of actual life. This point of view is particularly appealing to parents, who often emphasize the significance of setting a good example of emotional integrity and healthy relationships. The situation is much more intriguing because there isn't an obvious solution. Neither of them is making any future commitments. They talk about possibilities and the need for a change, acknowledging that the existing situation is unsustainable. The audience is kept intrigued by this unpredictability since it permits a range of potential outcomes. It's still up for debate whether they should separate, reconcile, or redefine their partnership. The show's editing choices also have an impact on how the story is perceived. The sense of loss is heightened by the comparison with earlier, more joyful moments. The audience is reminded of their earlier discussions and how hopeful they seemed about the future. And because of that contrast, the tension that is currently present feels more significant. It extends beyond what is happening right now. What appears to have been lost in the process is the focus of this discussion. Nonetheless, some members of the fan community are advising against passing judgment too quickly. They highlight the reality that reality television often only presents fragments of a wider picture and that interactions on screen are part of a larger context that viewers do not fully comprehend. As a reminder that the subjects being discussed are reports, impressions, and interpretations rather than confirmed results. This point of view lends a certain amount of ambiguity to the narrative. The sincerity of the moments, however, makes it impossible for the emotional viewers to avoid making impressions. The quiet tone, the reflective language, and the shared acknowledgement of sadness all contribute to the sense that something fundamental has changed. It doesn't appear to be a brief disagreement. It appears to be an acknowledgement that their connection may have changed over time. Similarly, as the show ends, the conversation feels incomplete. Instead, it appears to usher in a new era in their story, one that is marked by more questions than answers. Fans continue to analyze in an effort to determine the future ramifications of every word, feeling, and recorded detail. Even though the episode just provides a glimpse, the conversation about it continues to grow, turning a quick conversation into one of the season's most talked about moments. The end of the program hasn't yet calmed down the online reaction. The intensity increased. Discussion panels, live broadcasts, and recap channels began playing the same few lines over and over again in an effort to figure out posture, tone, and even the pauses between phrases. Some experts argued that his calm delivery showed someone who had already accepted a difficult truth, while others noted that his sporadic avoidance of direct eye contact suggested internal conflict. This difference in understanding led to the creation of two opposing narratives. In one, he is portrayed as emotionally aloof, whereas, in the other, he is described as quietly settling years of unresolved conflict. Supporters of Yandi pointed to her declarations that she wished for the children to live in stability and tranquility as evidence that her decisions were based on responsibility rather than whims. By emphasizing the contrast between her focus on the future and his focus on sacrifices made in the past, they suggested that they were both speaking from different emotional times. One was looking at what had been built, and the other was looking at what needed to be fixed. As viewers debated whether partnerships can survive when they stop using the same way to measure time, this perspective disparity became a big topic of discussion. Another level of discourse emerged around the idea of emotional labor. Supporters began discussing how long-lasting collaborations often need invisible labor that is rarely acknowledged in public. Some argued that years of carrying such load were the cause of the fatigue she described. Others countered that he had also been under a lot of public pressure and scrutiny. The debate moved from their specific situation to broader ones about what the public expects at weddings. The topic that persisted long after the episode's conclusion was sustained by people talking about their own experiences and drawing parallels between the story and their own lives. However, the fishing situation with his friend offered a more subdued but no less revealing dynamic away from the tension of the home. Because of a little shift in his tone, there were moments of vulnerability that viewers had not seen in the show before. He discussed the necessity to refrain from reacting in a way that could injure others, pride, and the challenge of accepting something that was intangible but deeply personal. Viewers identified with that discussion because they perceived it as an example of how men respond differently to emotional suffering, often expressing pride and authority through language rather than overt indications of sadness. According to discussion channels, emotional attachments outside of a partnership may appear more risky than physical ones, since they suggest a shift in the location where someone feels understood. That notion sparked lengthy discussion threads, with some viewers contending that the foundation of trust is emotional loyalty. Others retorted that communication problems in the primary partnership often lead to such external ties. Again, no definitive answer was provided, which only fueled further speculation. The program's discussion of blogs was another important topic. The notion that external narratives could influence internal dynamics cast doubt on the effects of continuous public scrutiny. Some fans believed that living under continual supervision could distort natural conflict resolution and make handling private disagreements in public more challenging. Some argued that the blog did nothing more than reflect what was already happening, serving more as a reflection than a source. Regardless of the point of view, the effect is clear. The audience has an impact on the encounter in addition to the individuals engaged. Friends and extended cast replies, even when shown for a short time, also contributed to the sense that the occurrence was affecting a wider circle. Quiet pauses, cautious advice, and anxious looks created an atmosphere of universal unease. Nobody appeared to be prepared to make a definitive choice, suggesting that even to those closest to them, the outcome was still up in the air. This ambiguity helped to highlight the fact that what viewers were witnessing was an ongoing process, rather than a resolved conflict. Nevertheless, the use of flashback content affected the audience's perception. By juxtaposing the current stress with sequences from earlier seasons that included laughter, celebrations, and promises of allegiance, a narrative arc centered on change over time was established. Since viewers were reminded of the difficulties they had already overcome, the present uncertainty seemed more significant. It was more than a quarrel. It was a moment that challenged the story they had told each other about their own relationship. For years, there was also debate about communication patterns. Several witnesses saw that both of them were speaking in general terms rather than describing specific incidents, which they interpreted as a sign of deeper issues that had not yet been adequately articulated. Some saw it as an attempt to keep things from going worse on camera. Again, the discrepancy in interpretation showed how much of the narrative is shaped by audience perception rather than explicit statements. The children were a silent force that affected every decision made during the conversation without actively participating. The weight of that truth distinguished this story from more superficial reality TV arguments. People who may have otherwise dismissed such situations as amusement were forced to consider the real-world implications of separation, emotional stability, and co-parenting. As the story was further explored, the claim that the puzzle did not fit took on greater significance. In addition to incompatibility, it also implied the time and effort required to make the parts fit together. Since puzzles are meant to be solved, acknowledging that they cannot be solved takes work and acceptance. The metaphor struck a chord with many viewers, and as a result, it is frequently used in discussions about relationships that evolve over time. Some commentators also noted the absence of blame in their language, since neither of them directly accused the other of any wrongdoing. The tone was one of mutual acknowledgement rather than confrontation. That tactic gave the scenario a more mature but also conclusive sense because it suggested that the issue was a larger shift in their relationship rather than a single occurrence that might be resolved, though they were always portrayed as possibilities rather than absolutes. Ideas concerning possible future events began to proliferate. Would they take some time apart, seek counseling, or reconsider their relationship? Because there were no clear answers, the plot remained open-ended, encouraging viewers to keep checking back for new developments. As everyone is aware, I have been looking into a section of Kurikwi, a section of Kuri, a section of Kuri, lot tst. We love that there are no conclusive answers. Maintained the shortfall with Cokes. Iqui squeak secure with cured or we like to read by iconography. Will I use kiwis? In your opinion? The viewer was urged not to view the scenario as a definitive split because reality television often compresses timetables, and exchanges on film may only reflect one stage in a longer process. By reminding the audience of who they are, this point of view helped to moderate the discussion. Instead of the whole complexity of a long-term partnership, those are truncated glimpses. However, the emotional truth of the visuals made it difficult to overlook the significance of what had been depicted. The calm tone, the careful wording, and the shared acceptance of uncertainty gave the impression that the relationship was at a turning point. Whether that pivotal moment leads to renewal or exit is undetermined, but since both of them are openly speculating about the future, it marks a turning point in the tale that fans have been following for years. As the discussion extended over fan pages and recap channels, tension began to shift toward the idea of history and how much of it a relationship can handle before it becomes too oppressive. When they talked about loyalty during difficult times, viewers started returning to previous programs. The difference between past assurance and current hesitancy was one of the most discussed aspects of this narrative thread, and it was gauged by comparing those clips to see how much the emotional tone had changed. People weren't just reacting to what was said in the most recent episode, they were reacting to the difference between these two's present identities and their seeming selves at the moment. Additionally, there was an increasing amount of conversation about identity in partnerships. Some observers claim that they have both independently altered in ways that may not be consistent with their long-standing partnership. When one person prioritizes regularity and consistency, while the other is still coping with unresolved feelings, the difference between those priorities can seem more important than any single fight. The plotline continued to draw viewers outside of the usual reality TV demographic because this idea resonated with people who have experienced similar upheavals in their own lives. Television watchers. Another thing that attracted attention was the way they both talked about effort.